You have a problem if I start 3 minutes early? You know what? I'll tell you what. I'll talk for 3 minutes, and then it won't make any difference. So I guess a couple of issues. First of all, much to the chagrin of everybody on the dais, and probably to the chagrin of everybody out there, I'm the what I like to refer to as the interim B&G committee chair. I'm hoping that interim will be shorter rather than longer, but it's an undisclosed period of time.
Why is it interim?
Because I refuse to be the permanent. I figured if I was never asked, it's a lot like going to prom. I was never asked. I had to pay my own ticket in, so that's how it works.
I asked you to chair the committee.
I thought you were going to ask for us.
That's a good, perfect. I never sent such an email. That's crazy. The one thing I do want to kind of just do, in all seriousness, for just a second, then I'll stop that. Mark and Val, thank you very much for the opportunity to chair the committee, even if it is on an interim basis. And I appreciate.
It's not interim. It is probationary.
It's probationary. Thank you. That's it. That's the one. And I do appreciate the opportunity. So thank you. The other thing I just want to just explain from a format for purposes of format, I'm going to make a little bit of a change. Staff has done a wonderful job, and I think they've done a wonderful job for every year that I've been on this board of writing these wonderful memos, which the members pay for dearly in the incredibly high cost of administration of this fund. And so as it turns out, when I canvassed the committee, we actually can read, which is interesting. We actually have advanced degrees and have passed elementary school. So I thought maybe what we ought to do is we ought to just read those memos instead of forcing you to come up and repeat what you already spent your time writing. Having said that, when we get to these non-action items, if there is a staff member that has new information or they need to supplement something in their report, just let me know and I'll have you come up and do that. I'd prefer that you just stick to the supplemental information. And obviously anybody in the committee, if you have questions about any of the non-action items, if you have questions about the report, if you want to talk to staff members, I'm not trying to discourage that at all. I'm just trying to be a little bit more efficient with staff's time and be respectful of the energy and time that staff has put into these memos and not force them to go through the whole thing each time. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, just be aware, bring that up as we get to those reports. All right, so can we start? Any issues? All right, so any non-agenda public comment?
No public comment.
Fantastic, we're already off to a good start. All right, so new business. The first order of business is the new independent audit committee member. Mark, I think you have some comments that you want to make?
I do. And actually, I also wanted to welcome one additional member to the audit committee, that being Bobby Spoon. Thank you for joining the committee as well. Val, in his prerogatives as board president, can reshuffle the deck a little bit, and he's done so. So we have a few changes in all of our committees. So I'm glad you're here. We have 5 members of the audit committee, as the committee as the Business and Governance Committee knows. We have independent members that serve 4-year terms. Independent member Jim Smith is completing his 4-year term this month. So we had one opening. Over the last several months, we have been looking for interested parties to step forward, and I expressed an interest in the position. We do have one. It turns out it was a personal friend and neighbor of Jim Smith named Paul Kaufman, who's in the audience today. And with that, I'll ask Paul to come and join us at the dais. While he's on his way up here, I will share with the committee that I've met with Paul before today and went through his background. I think he highly qualified, certainly meets the requirements of the committee. Interestingly, I believe Paul's background is helpful in that he's not another CPA. We have a very strong representation of certified public accountants who are sitting on the audit committee, and it's good to have a balance of perspectives. Paul was a vice president of corporate governance for CIMER here in town for a while. Prior to that, he was senior executive in the acquisitions area with Applied Materials up in the Bay Area. Commercial for my daughter. She also works for Applied Materials, but that has nothing to do with why I believe Paul's a bona fide candidate here. So anyway, he's here today to respond to any questions you may have. The audit committee can select their own chairperson, but they can't select their own committee members. It's this committee that vets and asks questions of candidates and recommends them to the full board. So Paul's here to answer your questions today.
Paul, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Paul, before I let my colleagues loose on you, I just one really important question. Why on God's green earth would you accept a sales pitch from somebody leaving the board that you should join it because they're getting off?
Jim asked me that same question.
All right, I'm just checking. No. Do you for those we've read what the information that you provided to Mark, but is there anything that you'd like to share with us?
I'm just, this seems like a great opportunity for me to get to know the city of San Diego a little bit better. I've lived here about 12 years and never really engaged with the city. This seemed like a really good opportunity to do that. And I know from my past experience that audits can be an excellent way of getting to know an organization. And I understand that this is one of the better run committees in the city governance. So it seemed like a great opportunity.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Kaufman?
Sure. Could you just explain a little bit about what your experience is? You mentioned that audits are a good way to get to know an organization, and I completely agree, but can you mention what experience you've had with audits, either being audited or participating in
No,
them?
it's a good question, Valentin. Is
Paul?
it Valentin?
Paul, could I
Valentine.
ask you
Valentine,
to-
excuse me, thank you.
Excuse me, Paul, could I ask you to pull the microphone a little bit
Oh,
closer?
sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. I've got about 42 years of experience, largely in the high-tech field, both with Digital Equipment Corporation on the East Coast, where I was originally from. Moved out to California about 25 years ago, joined Applied Materials, largely in their operations area, and then moved down to San Diego about 12 years ago for Cymer, where I held some positions relative to business operations and corporate governance. Regarding your specific question on internal audit, I actually held an internal audit position at Digital Equipment Corporation. I'm not sure if you're familiar with DEC, but it's a fairly large, used to be a fairly large organization. They had a very well thought of finance organization that was patterned after the Ford Motor Company model of financial management, which meant that they took all of their financial people and rotated them around to every function of the company. I was there about 14 years and saw just about every function, including internal audit. I was in the internal audit function for about 3 years. And most of that was financial and operational audits throughout the company.
Thank you. One of the important things for me in serving on this board is to ensure that we don't become an echo chamber where we only hear our own opinions and think of things within the box that we live in or our perspective. So it's important to bring diverse points of view and experiences to the governance of the organization. But it's also important, I think, to make sure that we have people with experience who've been through the process before, and trying to balance the two can sometimes be a challenge. Can you speak to that balance between being able to have the experience and
Yeah.
know what you're doing, but at the same time not be stuck with blinders on to what you've done before?
Sure, I think it's an excellent question, because I think certainly in an audit role, and again, this is a board-related position as opposed to physical audit itself, I think a certain degree of independence and open-mindedness plays a big part in that. And I think my background is at least as Mark described it, is a little bit broader than the financial CPA-oriented focal point within the existing members, and I think that might be complementary, both from the ability to see a problem through different angles and understand how compliance and business ethics can be applied effectively to help an organization achieve the objectives that it's trying to accomplish.
Thank you.
Yep.
I don't see anybody else in the queue.
Yep.
Please, Bobby, go ahead.
Sure.
I also sit on the audit committee, and I am a new member.
Good.
Is that it?
Yep.
And I have attended 2 meetings, and number one, I'd like to welcome you to the meeting, and I have certainly, I'm a CPA, and I sit on many audit committees and have for many years, and I have so enjoyed Mr. Smith's perspective and all of his comments, because they certainly come from a completely different place than any of my peers. So I welcome you, and I think you'll find that this organization is so professional, and the financial reporting is absolutely perfect.
Yeah, Jim spoke very, very highly.
There's a lawyer in the back of the room who completely agrees with that, by the way.
Thank you for your comments.
So it's, they're really, I mean, other than reading the materials, I think you you will find that it doesn't really take much time other than the reading of the materials. So welcome to the
Thank you very
committee. I
much.
look forward to working with you.
Good. Thank you very much.
Not to pour any water on that, but you may have jumped the gun just a little bit, Bobby. So just a second, can we get the vote up before we congratulate him? I'm just saying, just kind of. So the motion was moved by Charles, seconded by Roberta.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
And the motion passes 5-0. Paul, congratulations. And in the immortal words of our board president who put his arm around me before this meeting, I'll share the same advice to you. Please don't screw anything up.
Thank you very much. Very nice meeting you all. Good. Thank
All
you.
right. Next is the staff's recommendation to deny the appeal of Christopher Leahy. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly.
You did.
And real quick, Tom, you've got a quick comment to make?
Yeah, for disclosure on this topic, in my position at work, Detective Leahy approached me and we had a discussion about this, but in no way shall it affect my objectivity on it.
Okay, thank you. Susan?
Good morning. Mr. Leahy is an active city safety police member. He was hired in February 2002 and later became an SDCERS member that year. After he became a member, he missed contributions for one pay period and again in 2010, and in another pay period in 2010, he underpaid contributions. He has about $417 in principal that he has underpaid and $330 in interest for a total of about $750. In 2017, staff found the error and corrected it and notified Mr. Leahy. Based on the law, the board policies, and the plan, that amount needs to be recouped, and we would ask that the board deny Mr. Leahy's appeal. Mr. Conger is here on Mr. Leahy's behalf, and I believe that he has put in a speaker slip as well.
All right. Mr. Conger, do you wish to speak on behalf of, on item number A2?
Yes, I do. Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, then we're going to give you a whole 30 seconds. So you go right ahead.
Okay, that's about how much I've got. My name is Mike Conger. I'm here at the request of Detective Leahy and also at the request of the San Diego Police Officers Association. Ms. Youngflesh has disclosed to me that there are approximately 227 of your members who have had this similar type problem where, and let's be clear, these people didn't miss contributions. The city payroll office failed to properly process their payroll, period. The members do not get a pile of money and send some over to you and some to the IRS and some to the state taxing authorities. That's handled by city payroll. If you've ever actually seen a police officer's paycheck and can figure it out, you're a better man than I. So for a member, particularly a brand new member in 2002, not to understand what's going on, absolutely understandable. But here's what's important. The issue of how long a pension system in California can go to get an arrears contribution has already been decided, and a court would have to follow the case of County of Marin, which is not in staff's report. It's a famous pension case. It's County of Marin Association of Firefighters versus Marin County, and it's found at 30 Calap 4th, 1638. In that case, and I'll just quote from you at 1651, discussing another case, so I'll skip that one, but at 1652, this is the court, quote, "We find that the 3-year statute of limitations for relief," they're talking about to the pension system, "on the ground of mistake applies to the Retirement Association's claim for arrear contributions and interest." All of these missing contributions, assuming that there are, we have no way to tell, occurred in 2002, 2010, and another one in 2010. It's beyond the statute of limitations. So my suggestion is that the $750 in this case and the few $100s, I think, in each of these 227 cases be charged to the plan sponsor, which you have the plenary authority to do under the California Constitution. I saw the part about the new city charter, section 141.2, falls beneath the Constitution. You can put it in like you would any other mistake, particularly the city's mistake, into the unfunded liability, which the city has to amortize.
Mr. Conger, we got about 15 seconds.
Okay, and I'm wrapping up. So, and finally, I just want to say that this pension system is far, far outside the mainstream of California pension systems in going beyond 3 years to try to recover either payments or, in this case, contributions. So CalPERS has 3 years. CalSTRS has 2 years. 37 counties have 3 years. I have, from another case I have up in Orange County, have gone through all the other pension systems. You're the only one I can find that goes beyond 3 years. Outside the mainstream, I really think you ought to redo your policy. But in this particular case, I would urge you, because I
Mr.
don't...
Conger, I don't mean to cut you off. We're 30 seconds over your time. I
Okay.
appreciate your arguments. Thank you very much. Susan, do you have any comments for in relationship to Mr. Conger's comments?
I do, thank you. I appreciate okay, thank you. I appreciate Mr. Conker's comments. However, the County Marin case is not applicable to administrative hearings. It's applicable to court as well as the statute of limitations. This is not a court of law. Therefore, that statute of limitations argument is not applicable here.
Have we litigated that? Haven't we gotten that in another case? A couple times?
We have, as far as I know.
Johnny?
Yeah, Val, thank you. That argument was forwarded in 2 overpayment cases last year, and the judgment was in our favor that the statute of limitations did not apply. That's currently on appeal, though.
Okay.
Okay.
And additionally, if I can add to that, the 227 cases, if there are so, as Mr. Conger states, is not before the board today. The only thing before the board is Mr. or Detective Leahy. Thank you.
I have a question.
All right, so let me go to the queue. Val, you're in the queue.
Is it permissible under our rules to allow the member to have the option of taking a benefit reduction or where there's an underpaid contribution, or is it necessary that the contribution be made up and the benefits stay the same?
My understanding is that it's necessary that the contribution be made up, and the law supports getting the arrears contribution from Mr. Leahy.
I wasn't talking about who paid it. I just mean that we, whether it's from the unfunded liability or from Mr. Leahy or manna from heaven, we have to make up the contribution. We don't have the option of saying, okay, take 50 cents less in benefits 10 years from now every month, and we'll call it square. We can't do that.
Correct.
Okay.
Is there, just out of curiosity on that, Johnny, what is the rationale that we can't reduce the benefit to what he actually paid?
Just have to follow the plan, and the plan doesn't allow us to reduce the benefit because some mishap like that. We collect the right amount of contributions. We give the member the correct benefit that they've earned.
Does the plan prohibit it?
Yes, in that if a member worked for this period of time and they've earned the service credit and they're owed the contributions, they have to pay that. But if you're asking me, does the plan talk about what happens if we missed contributions and how to make that up, it doesn't do that.
Well, I think to Val's point, what I'd be interested in learning from staff is it an option to give a member, or can we give the member an option to take a reduced payment based on what they actually paid in or what was actually paid in or not? And it's fine if the answer is no, but I mean, because the part of the problem we have is none of us are thrilled about this, right? Because I will say this with a huge grain of salt. Mr. Conger is right about one thing, and that is that the employee didn't make the error. The staff, it was done on staff side or on the pension side on this side, and I'm sure it was unintentional. Okay, and we can argue about who should pay for that or whatever the case is. But if an employee could, I think part of the problem is when someone comes in and says, "Hey, we need X number of dollars from you today." Not necessarily in Detective Leahy's case, this is $700 and some odd dollars, but in some of these cases where the number is significant or maybe they don't have the ability to pay it in one shot, it seems logical to be able to say, great, starting today, we're going to reduce your benefit over your life expectancy based on that differential in pay. So all I'm curious is, if you know the answer, that's great. If you don't know the answer, I'd be curious to find out what the answer is at perhaps our next committee meeting or whatever the case may be.
I believe the answer is no.
Okay.
I had a second question, which was, is there a reason to distinguish between this instance where the plan sponsor may have been at fault in under collecting a contribution versus an instance where the pension system itself committed the error by overpaying a benefit? Because it seems to me they may be two different things, and I'd just like some discussion of that, some comment on that.
Sure. From a plan design, the employee contributions have to be made. I don't think there's a question about that. The question that you've asked, is it because the city made the mistake or SDCERS made the mistake? Is there a distinction there? And the plan doesn't address that, unfortunately. I think you, in your administrative role, you can make a distinction yourself, but understanding that our intent is always to follow our correction guidelines from the IRS, and they want the contributions to be made. So either from Mr. Leahy, either from the plan sponsor, or from other source that we can gather. With those restrictions, we've run into this problem of what wiggle room do we have when no one else is willing to pay.
And by the way, I'm really only talking about the interest because I see the contributions and the interest as being two different things.
Yes. There is a case, Barrett, that's been published where the retirement system misclassified a member. They were in some classification that they shouldn't have been in. And as a result, their benefit would have been increased had they been put in the right tier of benefits. The second part of that is, well, they should have paid more in their contributions. And the Court of Appeal in a published decision said, yeah, the system can require that member who's going to make out in the end to a higher benefit should pay his contributions and some portion of the interest. And the interest that accrued on that.
I have the Barrett citation if you'd like it.
Any other comments, questions? Yes?
We'll wait.
Are the two cases that are on appeal exactly the same as this case?
No.
And what's the difference?
The two cases on appeal are overpayment cases where SDCERS paid more than the benefits allowed by the statute. This is an underpaid of contributions case where the member, his paycheck wasn't deducted properly.
But is the issue that's on appeal the statute of limitations?
That's one of the issues, yes. And the issue forwarded was it was too late for SDCERS to collect on that overpayment or to correct that. And therefore, because of the statute of limitations, you could not correct the benefit. Here, the statute of limitations is being applied to say the underpayment was made past 3 years, and therefore you can't collect the underpaid contributions. Similar.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Val?
So I'm going to go back to what I asked earlier, and I think maybe Tom and I might disagree about this one, but while in a perfect world, there should be no interest attributable to this beyond what you'd be able to earn on this money if you put it in a safe investment. But we're required by law to use our rate of return, our discount rate, our 7% rate. And so that leaves this gap between maybe what you'd get if you had a perfectly safe investment of this money and what we have to charge by law. That's how I understand it. And so I had asked a question earlier, is there a distinction as to whether, between the case where the city makes a mistake and where the pension board does, and just in briefly thinking about it, I'm not sure there is a reason to make a distinction because this really isn't a fault-based determination. We're really not assigning blame like you would in a tort case and trying to make the world right like you would in a tort case. We're just making the system balance. And I don't know that we can or should do anything other than make the system balance. And I think that I said earlier, I think it was in the last meeting, no, I said it with Mark and 4 of our trustees at a pension conference. Hard cases make bad law. And if you try and make exceptions based upon what your heart tells you you want to do, then you're going to create a system that isn't going to work efficiently and isn't going to serve the members well. And therefore, I think I have to come down on the side of saying we have to make the system whole. I don't think it is appropriate for us to be like adjudicators in a tort case and decide who's right and who's wrong and who's at fault and who isn't. I really believe we have a very clear duty here to make the system whole and to collect the interest from the members. And I think that's that is the most difficult thing we do on this board, and it's one of the most controversial. And I wish I had a better solution to it, but I've spent 5 years not having a better solution to it. And Mr. Conger comes and makes really good arguments, but he's making an argument that I'm not able to process because he's talking about fault and responsibility. And that doesn't get me there. I need to make the system balance, and assigning it to the city and saying that solves the problem, it really doesn't solve the problem for me. I'd like somebody to come up with a better solution, but I haven't heard it from people in this boardroom, and I haven't heard it from Mr. Conger. So that's where I am on it.
Tom?
Well, I agree with the conclusion, and my history has always been if a city employee makes a mistake on behalf of another city employee, then the liability, in my opinion, lies with the sponsor. Your rationale going towards it and what my obligation is as a fiduciary always, and the guidance of staff always puts me in conflict with that, and I always vote my fiduciary responsibility always. But when I see something like this, when it's a payroll thing and we entrust the payroll to get it right, that frustrates me, especially when the punishment goes against another member for one employee's mistake. And as much as I don't like voting the way that I'm likely going to vote, it's just like Detective Leahy owes $417. The sponsor would, in my opinion, would owe the interest on it. But it just frustrates me that, I'm bound by certain guidelines on that.
I guess there's a couple of closing comments. This is the one thing that we fight, that we battle around all the time, and we're frustrated by it. And I know you guys have gone back, staff's gone back to the city several times about this issue. I hope you don't stop doing that. I think Tom's position is appropriate. I don't think it's the member's responsibility to pay the interest. Having said that, and Roberta, I think you just should be aware that what's really important, regardless of how the appeal turns out, is that we're consistent. Because if we have to correct something based on how that appeal turns out, we'd like to be able to do that across the board easily and consistently. And so the one thing that this board has always done is voted consistent with our guidelines, the policy, the charter, and in this case, also with the court's current decision pending the appeal. So for whatever that's worth, thank you. Mr. Conger, thank you. Can we get the,
I was in the queue.
oh, Tom, you're back in the queue?
Yeah,
Oh.
I was just thinking about, I know we kind of discounted a number that Mr. Conger threw out, an additional 227 members. I don't know what that entails, but I'd like to know what that dollar value coming forward, if they're.
I don't have that, but I can look into what that is and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I'm going to do something you're not going to be happy with, but Mr. Conger would like to speak, and if Mr. Conger has to go home and he's not even allowed to have the last word, he might kick his dog tonight.
I don't like dogs. If you had cats, it'd be a different issue. All right, Mr. Conger, but
I just
I'm
wanted
going
to
to
make
hold
sure.
you to the 1 minute.
Am I on again? So here's the solution. Get in the mainstream. Do not take my word for it. Have Susan or Johnny look at every single other pension system. Their policies, like yours, are different in one respect. They only collect for 3 years. And that's the issue in the appeal. Not that you can't fix it going forward, but you can't collect for more than 3 years back. So here's the solution. Honestly, revise your policy, 3-year look back period for overpayments or underpayments, and the rest goes to the plan sponsor, period. Look, I think staff does a good job. I know you've got new software. I understand how these mistakes came out. The 227 came from a Public Records Act request that Ms. Youngflesh provided to me. I have a copy of it here if you want to see it. But that's the solution. The solution is 3-year policy, particularly on contributions. Collect the rest from the plan sponsor, who, by the way, made the mistake. You're in the mainstream. We can debate whether the statute of limitations can be avoided by calling it an administrative act. That is the issue in appeal, because I don't think you can. But again, just be in the mainstream. That's all I'm asking.
Mr. Conger, thank you for your comments. You can tell your dog to forward his thank you letters to Val for that. All right, Cynthia.
make one more comment?
Absolutely.
Number one, I disagree with Mr. Conger on the case that's on appeal. I think there is no statute of limitations on this administrative correction. So we're lawyers who disagree. But I also think it's worth looking into a policy change that Mr. Conger has suggested and at least talking about it again, and that is not making any other change, but then to say, will we limit our look-back period and basically say to the city, look, we've asked you several times to address this problem. You haven't done it, so we're changing our policy, and if you don't like it, sue us. That's one option. And then they can either take action against us or not, but it is an option that I think is worth talking about. Not applicable to this case because we don't have that policy right now, but
I would just ask, by the way, if staff is going to look into that possibility, please also look at the unintended consequences, because a 3-year look back on both overpayments and underpayments can really hurt somebody who was underpaid for a considerable length of time. So I'm just, unfortunately, the problem with any of these solutions is that there is no good solution that fits everybody across the board. That's the problem with it. But if you're going to study it, and I have no problem with it, then please make sure that you are at least also give us some information on the other pieces of that. Is there anybody else in the queue?
Mark.
I was just going to add one more thing.
You're not in my queue, Mark. Mark
No, I
Hovey.
am.
Mark, go ahead. You're in the queue.
This may be more for Bobby's benefit, but we have gone back to the city several times over the last several years, asking them to play a role in helping resolve underpayments and specifically on interest as well, and they have said no each time. We actually did have an SDCERS board policy at one time in which we charged the member only 2% and we asked the city to pay the remaining percent. And that drew threats of litigation from the city attorney at the time saying, you can't charge me any interest. So we have a history with the city in which we've asked them repeatedly, as Val said, and they've said no. That doesn't mean that we can't keep asking them and looking at different issues here. So we'll take another look at it.
Thank you. Anybody else in the queue? Charlie, you've been very quiet. All right. Cynthia, can we get the motion up? It's the motion to approve staff's recommendation to deny the appeal of Christopher Leahy. It's been moved by Val. It's been seconded by Charlie.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
And that motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Let's move on to staff's recommendation to deny the appeal of Marguerite Hightower.
Thank you. Ms. Hightower is an active city employee. She was hired initially in 1977 and then left city employment in 1986. At that time, she was refunded her contributions. She was then rehired by the city in 2014 and became an SDCERS member. She chose not to pay back her contributions, and so she was only eligible for the 2009 plan. Because of that, there was an incorrect age rate reported, and the age rate that was reported was her initial age of 24 in 1977, instead of the correct age of 60. When she was reemployed by the city, she was underpaid contributions of about $2,200 plus interest of $280. She appeals because it was not her fault, and she also appeals on the basis of financial hardship. So I'd like to give a little bit of a history on the financial hardship piece. Initially, when this appeal started with financial hardship was in the underpayment of contribution policy. Since that time, it has been taken out of the current policy for underpayment of contributions because of the confusion that would cause the members. There's been a handful of cases, as you know, that we've gone to the city and we've asked for them to pay on the members' behalf of the principal and the interest, and they have declined. But because that was in place when this started. We went and asked Ms. Hightower for some sort of proof of financial hardship, and she's declined to provide anything. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I don't see anybody in the queue. All right, Cynthia? So motion to approve staff's recommendation to deny the appeal of Marguerite Hightower. I'll make that motion. Seconded by Thomas.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
And that motion carries 5-0. All right, staff's recommendation to revise Board Rule 5.10, proof of age. And Marcella, just really quick, one question I do want to ask is if the member believes their age is different than what the plan sponsor's reporting, do they still have an option to provide proof to us and have it resolved? I just didn't see that addressed anywhere in the material, and I thought I'd ask the question.
Sorry, turned off. Absolutely, they do.
Okay.
They still have the option to provide us that information. And remember, every year, our members who are not yet retired get a membership statement, and that membership statement has on it their date of birth, so they have the ability to confirm that it's correct.
Perfect. Thank you. Obviously, we've read the material, but do you have any comments that you want to make? The change was really to Rule 5.10, Section B,
Correct.
as I recall.
Yes.
Anybody have any questions? Anybody in the queue? All right, let's, please. I'll slow down for you. It's okay. Val, you're in the queue. Could you have anything to say?
Good morning, Val.
Good morning, Ms. Rossman. Do we have any reason to believe that we will have less accurate data or more accurate data if we make this change? In other words, have you considered whether there's any impact on our collection of accurate data by making this change?
We have considered that, and I do not think there will be any change to that. The rare occasions where we've had members who have said that their age is incorrect are members who have, for example, 2 birth certificates, one issued by a hospital, one issued by the U.S. military with 2 different years on them. Or we've had people who were born in very rural areas and their birth date was in a family Bible and they later came across more information, but we haven't had an instance where a plan sponsor has submitted us incorrect information and the member has said, oh no, that's incorrect. Or up to this point, we've been verifying it ourselves and we have not had an instance where that's happened.
Thank you.
I don't see anybody else in the queue. Is there anybody who wants to be in the queue? All right, Cynthia. Can we bring up the motion to approve approve staff's recommendation to revise Board Rule 5.10, proof of age? It's been moved by Charles. It's been seconded by Thomas.
Ready to vote?
Sure, I've gotten informal with all the first names on this
All
committee.
votes are in.
I don't have any friends outside this committee, so damn it, I'm making them my friends by using first names only, just so we know. All right. Oh, that carries 5-0. All right. Staff's recommendation to revise Board Rule 6.60, member to enter drop at the beginning of pay period. You're up again.
I am. I'm here to answer any questions you may have on this.
This is the new Tanasi Priovalos rule.
This
Yes.
is the new, that's right. All right. I don't see anybody in the queue. Is there anybody who wants to be in the queue? Great. Cynthia, let's bring up the motion. Charlie has moved the motion. Oh, no, Roberta moved the motion. Sorry. Val has seconded it. All right.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
That motion carries 5-0. All right. Staff's recommendation to adopt the CY 2018 board and committee meetings schedule. I found this completely unacceptable, Johnny. The color scheme used on the second exhibit was just awful.
I'd like to be in the queue.
No. No, I'm sorry. Johnny, go ahead.
There's a
Tom, what
proposed-
are you doing a month from today?
Probation denied.
Here's a proposed schedule. We hope that you adopt it and that you clear your calendar so you can make the meetings next year.
Anybody in the queue?
And Thanasi, by the way, that's my calendar.
As I said, I thought the color scheme was beautiful. I love the calendar. Like I said, I've never seen a better calendar, okay? I just feel bad that you're hamstrung by having Johnny have to talk about it. I feel bad about that, but I'll tell you what. Whew. Can we bring up that motion quickly? It's been,
He'd like to.
okay, you're in the queue belatedly. Go ahead. I apologize.
Actually, all I was going to do is about clearing the calendar. I'm already scheduled. I'll be out of town for the March meeting. If that means anything to you, Mr. Chairman.
It means a lot to me. I think that we need to revisit that date.
We definitely can do that if you provide me with your other availability.
This
I
part
mean,
was
we don't
slowing
have to
down
do
the
this
meeting.
on the record, but if you'd like to work with me afterwards, and we can talk about an alternate schedule for the March meeting.
Charles, are you okay if we approve this currently, and if we make an adjustment to it, we bring that back?
Yes.
All right. Can we have the motion, please?
Ready to vote?
It's been moved by Roberta, seconded by Thomas.
All votes are in.
All right. That motion carries 5-0. All right. So on to new business. There are 4 items. There's no action requested. What I would ask, is there anybody on any of those 4 items, either on staff side or on the committee side, that needs to have or hear any discussion on those items? Johnny.
Val, staff would like to talk about item 1, KPMG's review, just because it's a unique engagement, one requested specifically by the board. So if you'd honor us with 3 minutes, I'd appreciate it.
I'll give you more than that, but I just want to, is it staff or is it Johnny that wants this?
Staff,
Staff. Okay, just a second. Yes, please. Who's coming up to talk? Oh, Marcel, come on up.
thank you. This is something we haven't done. We haven't engaged a CPA audit firm to help us with our tax compliance plan. I think it's special in a few respects. Back in 2007, IRS tax compliance wasn't on top of it, so we entered a tax compliance statement with the IRS. We formally started our program. We got it in place. We had a full headcount attorney in charge of it. We had our outside counsel helping us, reviewing it periodically, to the point where I think it's been in good shape. But because of the historic problem with it, and the board and staff wanted an independent review of what we do here outside of Ice Miller and the attorney's opinions, outside of staff Marcel's operational opinions of it. So we engaged a CPA firm, KPMG, to review the certain tax requirements, different areas that we have had problems in the past. So Marcel's team does a great job of administering this. I want Marcel to walk through some of the findings and their conclusions, if you will. Thank you.
Good morning. So there were several different areas that KPMG looked at. The part I want to talk about first are the areas where they didn't find anything, and I think those are actually the most important pieces. The areas that talk about, the tax laws that talk about what's the maximum compensation a member can have that we can calculate a benefit on, what's the maximum amount of contributions a member can make towards their pension, what's the maximum amount we can pay for a pension out of the trust funds, and how do we calculate what part comes out of the trust funds and what part must come out of the preservation of benefits fund that comes to us from the 3 plan sponsors. In all of those areas, there were no findings at all. All of that was working very well. The area where they found findings, I want to read something from their cover letter. They have a sentence in there: compliance issues identified were one-off in nature and were not representative systemic issues. So we had 2 1099-Rs that had an incorrect reporting in box 7. It did not change the taxability of those 1099s. It did not impact how a member would have filed their tax return. So we had those 2 issues. The area where they did find some issues was in the required minimum distribution. This is for our inactive members who are never going to qualify for a benefit because they don't have enough years of service with our plan sponsors. So they are able to leave their monies on account with us. When they turn 70 and a half, they are required to start taking distributions. There were some unusual situations that occurred that, as they said, were one-off in nature, where we need to do some more work on improving our procedures. We have already completed the update of our procedures manual for this, and we do have a couple of changes that we'll be making to IRIS to help us facilitate this. All of the recommendations will be completed before the end of the calendar year. Most of them have already been completed. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Anybody in the queue? Anybody that wants to be in the queue? All right.
Can I add one last sentence?
Of course, absolutely.
The last thing that they said in their report, which I think is important, SDCERS has a highly efficient tax compliance program regarding the tax sections outlined in our report. So we were happy to have some outside validation that we are doing it correctly.
And I would like to say thank you guys. I think this is, to me, I was not surprised by the findings. This is the one area where I think, no, this is one of the areas that I think staff really shines at. And there's others, but this one is one that I've just always felt very comfortable. The reporting's fantastic. Ted puts a lot of numbers on pages. It's very impressive.
It
And
is
so
very
it's nice to
impressive.
know that it's nice to know that it's been validated. So thank you.
Sure.
Question brought up by the audit committee yesterday who heard the same issue, and that is what's the frequency with which we will do reviews like this? We've been on a 3-year cycle of having an external person come in and assess our tax compliance. The last 2 reviews before this one were done by our current outside tax counsel, Ice Miller. In this particular case, we thought it would be best to have someone one step further removed from providing us advice on a regular basis to assess our compliance, which is why we went with the CPA firm. So I suspect we'll be on a 3-year cycle. I don't know if it will be with KPMG or with Ice Miller, but we'll be continuing to do these every 3 years.
For whatever it's worth, my preference is it not be with Ice Miller. So,
Okay.
all right. Anybody else in this group of no action items on new business that wants, from staff side? Anybody on the committee that wants to hear from anybody on any of those items? Sure.
I just wanted to comment, Mark, and the staff. I saw the employee satisfaction ratings, and it's really nice to have a place where it appears everybody wants to come to work and everybody's friendly, and it's a great thing to do. And not too many companies and workplaces can have that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right, let's go on. We're moving on to old business. So I guess the first item is staff's recommendation to revise board rules 7.1, 8.12, and 10.9. Johnny?
Thank you. Staff made recommendations last meeting to change this, to essentially limit when a member could come back and ask that the board reconsider a decision affecting them, either through disability application or through a B&G appeal. You had a long discussion about those recommendations and made it clear that you didn't want to limit that ability to reconsider anything, that you had some wording change that you'd like to follow the civil code, a procedure, and what efforts we would take to inform the member of when it's likely we would reconsider their decision. So we made changes to the 3 rules that affect that I believe reflect your comments, and I'd ask that you adopt the changes.
And as I understand it, the limitation is basically, it was primarily to 7.1B and the respective paragraphs in the others. And it basically deals with new or different facts or circumstances that have come up. Is that correct?
Yes, I had wanted to limit it to only new facts, whatnot. So I don't think you're limited by this language. They could request it based on the same facts if they wanted to, and the board could then take that up if they wanted to. With this new change, though, it's going to be status quo in that sense. But it's giving the members some guidance that you're more interested in hearing a reconsideration, new facts, new points of law, different facts.
From a procedural standpoint, this is somebody who's been to an adjudicator, has come back and is saying, I want to reconsider it. And so what we're really asking for is, hey, that's great, but we're not going to redo what the adjudicator did. We want to see what your new facts or what didn't the adjudicator consider or something of that nature.
Yes,
okay.
but not just an adjudicator. It would also be Mr. Leahy if the board would deny this tomorrow to come back and request reconsideration.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Anybody who wants to be in the queue? All right. Cynthia, can we have the motion? It's moved by Charles, seconded by by Roberta.
Ready to vote? All votes are in.
And that motion carries 5-0. Okay. We have another no action item, report on overpayments to members. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on that? Anybody who wishes to be, anybody have any questions on that, on the committee? All right, hearing none. We now have, we're in status reports. So same issue here. We have potentially 8 staff reports by division. Are there any staff members that have information that they wish to augment what's in the board package? Anything that you want to discuss with anybody? Okay, hearing nothing from staff. Committee? Anybody have any questions of any of the staff members about their reports? Hearing none. Are there questions and comments from the chair? Nope. Okay. Any non-docketed items?
No.
Then, can I get a motion to adjourn? Thank you.